Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Life After Capitalism, The Meaning of Wealth, the Future of the Economy, and the Time Theory of Money, by George Gilder, narrated by Eric Michael Summerer. Prologue. The Theory. Life After Capitalism depicts the current economic era and launches a new economic theory. The current era comes after capitalism because the prevailing capitalist theory, conceived by Adam Smith and coined by Karl Marx, is deeply inconsistent with actual capitalist practice. Moreover, government policies everywhere defy and disable the canonical tenets of capitalism. In no sense is an economy a great machine, as Smith dubbed it, and in no sense is an economy's distribution of wealth as significant as its production, as so many economists and politicians seem to believe. Because capitalist markets, whether for equities, commodities, labor, investment, or trade, have given way to a new generation of government rules, best defined as emergency socialism, we have moved beyond capitalism. We are suppressing the surprises of capitalist innovation in the name of assuring a determined future with assured allocations of scarce resources and guaranteed returns. The result is a conundrum, wrapped in an enigma, capped with a perplex of paradoxes, measured by a muddle of deceptive statistics, described by a dismal discourse of deranged doctrines. We experience it all today in what I call life after capitalism. The seeds of the new era were sown in 1971, when Richard Nixon and Milton Friedman unveiled the initial phase of emergency socialism, emergency monetarism. It dissolved the immemorial link between money and gold. Instead, we were set adrift into a world economy of floating currencies. Today, amidst roaring waves of computational noise, the float has swollen to a level exceeding $7.5 trillion a day, a hypertrophy of finance, ruled by central banks far beyond any conventional capitalist constraints. At the same time, a vast and imperial information industry has emerged, from Apple and Amazon to Google and Meta, that dominates the list of the world's most valuable companies. The information theory that Claude Shannon, Alan Turing, and John von Neumann conceived and expounded during the middle of the 20th century springs from the insight that information is unexpected bits. It is surprise. This information theory is at the heart of the computer and communications sciences that define the era. Information theory enables the prevailing languages, codes, data systems, bits and bytes, network architectures, bandwidth gauges, and business philosophies of these massive companies of the information age. Extended to economics, this information theory is now providing the principles for a new economic revolution that is overturning the incentive-run mechanisms, materialist assumptions, scarce resources, and static demand-side models of Adam Smith and Karl Marx. The new information theory is leading us to a new understanding of economics and a new era of abundance and creativity. The information theory of economics springs from a set of key truths summed up in 4 canonical propositions. 1. Wealth is knowledge. 2. Growth is learning. 3. Information is surprise. 4. Money is time. Time is the only money that politicians and their bankers cannot print or distort, counterfeit or fake. You can only keep what you give away. Money gains value only when it is invested. Wealth is knowledge. You can only profit from what you know. Information is the unfolding of surprise, what you didn't know. Economics is not about order and equilibrium, but about creativity, measured by disruption, disorder, economic growth, and surprise. Economic growth is a gauge of learning, manifested in learning curves across the economy. Economics is a dance to the music of time. Chapter 1. Life After Capitalism. The materialist superstition is the great disabling error of all the dominant schools of economic thought. It is the belief that scarce material things are what constitute wealth. Under this materialist superstition, economics becomes chiefly the science of allocating irreducibly scarce material resources. If economics is the allocation of scarcity, politics becomes the enforcement of these unhappy allocations, and war, alas, remains the pursuit of politics by other means. Even capitalism's great theorists and advocates concur that the wealth of nations stems from self-interest, pejoratively greed, heretofore known as the root of all evil. This evil, paradoxically, is said to bring forth goods. Yet these goods are no complement to the butcher or the baker, who does nothing more than pursue his own interests within a mechanical system of markets unconsciously ordained by an invisible hand to yield some portion of bread and meat to the people. Valued by their very scarcity, these goods implicitly associate the wealth of the rich with the want of the poor. Adam Smith himself believed that if the needs of men were ever met, the system's motive force would fail. Today, capitalism's triumphs appear to be bringing about the system's most complete rejection to date. As a global surge of capitalist abundance liberates the poor, capitalism's critics have found a new capitalist victim, the earth itself. And the criminals are not just the capitalists, or imperialists, bankers, merchants, monopolists, or Jews, though Israel still receives special opprobrium, but mankind itself. We are the bane of the earth. This is the final, and on its own terms irrefutable, charge against capitalism. Abundance becomes poverty because it despoils the world. This argument, an argument not for socialism per se, but for government-directed economic sustainability, is the argument that has apparently won the day. True, some 57% of registered Democrats profess sympathy for socialism, and the runner-up for the Democratic nomination for president in 2016 and 2020 was a registered socialist. But the percentage of Americans and Europeans who buy into some version of sustainability is vastly greater than the percentage that has ever accepted socialism. Socialism has never been systematically taught in American primary and secondary schools, but sustainability is revered as the only way to escape ecological disaster. According to a BBC poll, 56% of schoolchildren believe that humanity is doomed because of its destruction of the planet. Under the new materialism, we are required to treat carbon dioxide, the basis of organic life, as a capitalist-generated poison. Regulating that poison empowers an effectively socialist bureaucracy that travels under the name of sustainability. We also have the imposition of emergency socialism, though it too does not go by that name, but rather under the name of the science, and the presumption that government experts know best. Nevertheless, we can call it by what it really is. Emergency socialism justified the government takeover of nearly the entire American economy and American social life during the COVID-19 pandemic panic. In this form, emergency socialism is passing, but the tools and techniques, the propaganda and intimidation, are now an established weapon of anti-capitalism, to be redeployed at any need or opportunity. More than ever in America, we face the prospect of a life after capitalism in its most negative sense, a life of scarcity, deprivation, and fear. But there is a different, better version of life after capitalism. It is one that not only makes better sense of capitalism as it truly operates, but one that utterly refutes the idea that human productivity and prosperity are lethal threats to the planet. Capitalism's theory, from the beginning, has been at odds with its most fundamental reality, which is the abundance it brings forth. Adam Smith and his heirs did not seek to create an economic system, but to describe how economics, as they observed it, actually worked. And while theirs was a noble and prodigious effort that yielded great insights, it made a fundamental observational philosophical mistake. By resting capitalist theory on the faulty foundation of materialist rewards and punishments, rather than on human ingenuity, creativity, and accumulating wisdom, they made a critical error, one that has worsened over time. The goal of this book is to undo that error and to reset economics upon its four foundational truths. Wealth is knowledge. Growth is learning. Money is time. Information is surprise. Wealth is knowledge. I wrote this book, in part, in Hawaii, where I traveled to do the final edits with my counselor and co-author of 2 chapters of this book, economist Gail Pooley of Brigham Young University, Hawaii. Amid tropical plenitude, my wife and I and my editor, Richard Vigilante, found ourselves surrounded by ample food resources. Coconuts abounded nearby. Chickens clucked on the lawn. Macadamia trees shed their bounty across the grass. Pineapples were plentiful in the fields, and fish were abundant in the nearby ocean. But we gave nary a thought to the idea of gathering coconuts and pineapples, catching fish, or wringing the necks of chickens. Instead, we drove 7 miles and ate at a restaurant in Haleiwa, paying $147 for the service. We could, of course, have gone to a store and bought the ingredients for the lobster Cobb salads and mahi-mahi dish that we ordered, and made them ourselves in our home kitchen. But we didn't. Instead, we traded our money, the result of our knowledge put to work in newsletters, books, and speeches, for the knowledge of the restaurant owner, chefs, and waiter to produce appealing dishes at a profit to themselves and at a price we thought was fair. What we as individuals were exchanging was the differential knowledge that we call wealth. On our way to the restaurant, there was another economic lesson to be drawn. We filled our car with gasoline made from petroleum with a 10% mixture of the biofuel ethanol. We also passed an array of giant windmills generating electric power, perhaps someday for electric cars. It is presumed that windmill-driven electric power is sustainable and petroleum is not. But the idea that petroleum is not a sustainable resource and that wind is expresses a logical fallacy. Wind is believed to be free, like sunlight. Petroleum is deemed to be scarce and even precious, approaching a peak of availability. But all forms of energy are essentially free. For untold centuries, oil remained mostly beneath the earth or leaking to the surface, but man had no notion of its value or how to harvest it, let alone how to refine it into gasoline, mix it with the politician-prescribed elixir of ethanol, and transport it around the world to gas stations that can sell it to willing consumers for more value than it costs to process it and transport it. When you insert your credit card into the gas pump, what you're really buying is the knowledge that makes that transaction possible. The material involved, whether primeval carbon from decaying dinosaurs or expired zooplankton and algae, or even the corn for the ethanol, is beside the point. Atoms are abundant and free. They are ruled by the physical and chemical laws governing the conservation of matter and energy. It was knowledge ranging from chemical engineering to oil extraction to petroleum production to service station construction to shipping and trucking networks to microchip fabrication to every aspect of the supply chain that makes every gas station, which we take for granted, possible. Adam Smith, the first great economist of capitalism, named his classic tome The Wealth of Nations. He ascribed this wealth to the division of labor, where different people cooperate, exchanging skills and products for money. In choosing to highlight the division of labor, Smith came tantalizingly close to identifying the true source of wealth, which is knowledge. Growth is learning. Specialization, as in the division of labor, accelerates learning, and the wealth of nations is advanced by the learning of nations. The most powerful driver of global economic growth over the last half-century is Gordon Moore's law of microchips, ordaining that their computational power will double every 2 years. Moore's law is a phenomenon of learning, related in a complex way to what is called a learning curve, in this case manifested in the number of transistor switches that can be wired together on a single sliver of silicon the size of your thumbnail. The idea of the learning curve was popularized in the 1950s and 1960s by Bruce Henderson of the Boston Consulting Group and Bill Bain of Bain & Company. Learning curve theory predicts that in a market economy, the costs of any good or service will drop by 20 to 30% with every doubling of total units sold. applicable to everything from chicken eggs to trucking miles to insurance policy dollars to airline seats to lines of software code. Learning curves are the most fully documented phenomenon in business economics. The learning curve is really a measure of how much knowledge increases as workers and managers expand production and sales volume, or, in other words, as they advance in experience and technical savvy. They learn to create better, faster, and more efficiently, cutting costs. A study from the Santa Fe Institute showed that while Moore's law is based on time rather than production, it is essentially a learning curve. The reason Moore's law seems unique, with a 1,000,000-fold increase in the number of computations per second and a 2 billion-fold rise in memory densities over 50 years, is that the volumes of transistors on a chip grew at an unprecedented pace. The learning curve was accelerated as the industry moved from processing matter through chemical reactions, heating, pressure, and phase changes, to manipulating matter from the inside through the microcosm of quantum physics. Through competition, imitation, research, experiment, and engineering genius, the semiconductor industry learned how to reduce transistor sizes enough to double computational efficiency every 2 years. Most people, including economists, regard money as the measure of value, and certainly money is a unit of account, a store of value, and a medium for transactions. A vast international infrastructure administers its use around the globe. To define its value entails a huge industry of econometrics, purchasing power parities, consumer price indices, gross domestic product deflators, productivity gauges, and other complex procedures. Unfortunately, they end up in a muddle, or what I have called a scandal of money. Failing to recognize our move into a new realm beyond capitalism, the world's central bankers and governments engage in a futile and perverse process of manipulating money in the name of creating wealth. The result is to stultify business and thus erode knowledge, the very wealth they seek. In the information theory of economics, value springs from volume. The learning curve shows that volume drives learning, and that, in turn, knowledge creates wealth. In 2022, global gross domestic product, GDP, surpassed an annual rate of $100 trillion for the first time, and this occurred even amidst war between Ukraine and Russia, continuing, if residual, panic from the pandemic, and blatant governmental mismanagement of some of the world's leading economies. Silicon technology is far and away the most important tool of that $100 trillion economy, driving virtually all economic progress. Much of that $100 trillion in GDP would disappear without it. Is this wealth, all this money, in any important sense material? The material basis of the silicon economy, opaque and transparent, silicon chips and silica fiber optic lines, is sand. The other two key elements in the chemistry of the chip are oxygen and aluminum. In short, what drives much of the value of the $100 trillion world economy has nothing to do with material scarcity and nothing to do with money, per se. It has everything to do with knowledge. As Gordon Moore, of Moore's Law fame, co-founder of Intel Corporation and one of the key inventors of silicon devices, observed, "The silicon, oxygen, and aluminum of microchips are the three most abundant elements in the Earth's crust. They are dirt cheap because they are dirt. Virtually all the value of the semiconductor and optical industries comes from the knowledge they embody, the learning accumulated over time." Money is time. In transactions of valuable economic knowledge, we inevitably refer to the role of money. When we pay for gasoline or a meal, we offer cash or credit in return for the product and service. When someone purchases beachfront property, he uses capital for the exchange. When an employer hires an employee and buys equipment for his business, he uses working capital. When economists tote up all this economic activity and how it benefits each of us, they call it wealth. Successful financiers tend to regard their superior wealth as their reward for superior knowledge. Governments tend to agree, though they typically rail against alleged financial legerdemain, money power, inside trading, and monopoly. because it justifies their expanding the countervailing bureaucratic powers of increasing regulation and taxes, and commissioning central banks to print money by the tens of trillions for government redistribution and subsidies. The suspicion of the money power is global. In the West, sustainability is proving an effective way to empower government against the alleged rapacity of energy companies and to stultify private enterprise. In China, they are unleashing commissars of common prosperity to intimidate entrepreneurial titans like Jack Ma of Alibaba and Pony Ma of Tencent. But all this concern with money power is misplaced. As I hope to prove with the assistance of Gail Pooley, professor of economics at Brigham Young University in Laie, Hawaii, and Marion Tupy of St. Andrew's College in Scotland and the Cato Institute, money should serve not as a magic wand for bankers and politicians, but as a measuring stick for entrepreneurs. Our goal is to overthrow another great error of fashionable economics, the idea that money is a commodity, a thing that incarnates economic wealth rather than merely calculating it. Money, as we will show, is a measure of time. Money is not something to be hoarded and manipulated to achieve economic goals. It is a measure of the learning curve of time, volume, and value. This does not mean money is merely any passage of hours and minutes. It is not wholesale or amorphous time. It is tokenized time earned in productive processes. The more we produce over a given time, the more value we can reap in exchange. As the number of units produced increases per hour or minute, productivity increases, or time that can be devoted to other purposes. A company describes this increase of time as a monetary profit. A worker describes it as an increase in monetary wages. But real money is ultimately rooted in tokens of time. When you run out of money, you are in fact running out of the time to earn more money. Time, whether measured by the speed of light or the span of life, is the reigning economic and physical scarcity that regulates the measurement of value. Pooley and Tupy, building on the time-price revolution pioneered by William Nordhaus of Yale in 1972 and advanced massively by Julian Simon afterwards, show that demand is a product of abundance, not of scarcity. It is a variation of Say's law that supply creates its own demand. Take our microchip, for example. For all its contribution to economic growth, the microchip industry itself comprises a little over 0.6% of the world economy, $650 billion of $100 trillion. If semiconductors cost 10 times as much, an economist might estimate that they would generate a larger portion of world GDP because he would be measuring their value materially with money. But at 10 times the cost, microchips would not be 1/10 as useful. Their share of total GDP would not rise, but fall. The real yield of semiconductors is time saved for other purposes, including other products that can be produced. The transistor is what we have called a defining abundance of an economy, powering the most efficient and productive use of other resources. Time is the only truly scarce resource, not transistors, the cost of which now approaches a billionth of a cent. Economic growth comes from learning, from the accumulation of knowledge through experience, and from falsifiable experiments, including profit and loss in the marketplace, the testing ground for entrepreneurial experiments. Wealth is knowledge measured by money as time, which is what remains scarce when all else grows abundant. Time is the ultimate measuring stick of productivity, economic value, and abundance. Information is surprise. Surprise is the very definition of new information, and information theory is the foundation of modern computing and communications, the indispensable science for the information economy. When Claude Shannon of MIT innovated information theory for the American military, he did so to figure out how to maximize communication through a limited channel, whether telegraph or telephone or radio or even emergency beacons. The first step, he showed, is economizing on the message itself, eliminating everything unnecessary. Before radio, ships at sea signaled each other with flags carrying perhaps a single symbol. With a code book, 1 or 2 symbols could become sentences of instruction. Shannon realized that in most communications, only the surprising, non-predictable part is needed. New information, the information from which we learn, is surprising information. Any government that understood information theory and information economics and wanted to increase its nation's wealth would provide a free market, which is an information system of supply and demand, profit and loss, and cooperative price signals, as unregulated as possible so that economic information, new information, surprising information, traveled freely, increasing learning and thus increasing productivity. It is knowledge and innovation that comes from surprising information that turns material things, which are naturally abundant, foods and fibers, fuels and ores, into wealth. Life after capitalism is an economy limited only by Simon's ultimate resource, the limitations of human knowledge and creativity, or, to put it another way, it is an economics of superabundance as information and knowledge expands. Chapter 2. Money is time. Every year since 1986, the American Farm Bureau Federation has compiled a survey of the price of a Thanksgiving dinner, with a 16-pound turkey and all the fixings, 14 ounces of cubed stuffing, 3 pounds of sweet potatoes, a pound of green peas, a 1-pound veggie tray, a 30-ounce pumpkin pie, 12 ounces of fresh cranberries, 12 rolls, 2 pie shells, a half pint of whipping cream, a gallon of milk, and a few extras. The Farm Bureau notes that while the nominal price of that Thanksgiving feast has risen 70.1% over 36 years, that's mainly due to monetary inflation. In real, inflation-adjusted dollars, the price of Thanksgiving has remained essentially flat. The Farm Bureau thinks that's good news, but there are other ways to look at it. America's consumer base over that period has grown dramatically in size and purchasing power, and government farm subsidies have ranged from $5 billion to $30 billion a year. Farmers and agricultural distributors have made vast investments in machinery and transportation, research and technology, and yet the Farm Bureau believes that our industries of food production and distribution have been on a treadmill since 1986. They have failed to make a dent in real food prices. Could this be true? Or could we be measuring prices incorrectly? The actual price we pay for anything is not best expressed by manipulated government money and sloppy inflation adjustments. The real price is the amount of time it takes to earn the money to buy goods and services. When we spend money, we are spending our time, the time it took us to accumulate the money. As Yale University Nobel laureate William Nordhaus demonstrated, by failing to account for time, prevailing accounts of economic history had dramatically underestimated economic advances. He proved this by analyzing in scrupulous detail how people had produced light over the millennia, from cave fires to Babylonian wick lamps to candles to incandescent bulbs to fluorescent lights, and at what cost. In 1994, Nordhaus wrote an essay for the National Bureau of Economic Research. It was titled, "Do Real Income and Real Wage Measures Capture Reality? The History of Lighting Suggests Not." Nordhaus concluded, one modern 100-watt incandescent bulb burning for 3 hours each night would produce 1.5 million lumen hours of light per year. At the beginning of the last century, 1800, obtaining this amount of light would have required burning 17,000 candles, and the average worker would have had to toil almost 1,000 hours to earn the dollars to buy the candles. In the modern era, with a compact fluorescent bulb, the 1.5 million lumen hours would need 22 kilowatt hours, which can be bought for about 10 minutes work by the average worker in 1990. Or 6,000 times less. For economists who were paying attention, Nordhaus's research amounted to a paradigm shift. As I wrote in Knowledge and Power in 2013, economists erred because they concentrated on money prices rather than real labor costs, how many hours workers had to labor to buy light. One apparent difficulty, however, with the Nordhaus approach is that it is not scalable. No one can evaluate the true effects of all the endless changes and improvements in the goods and services of a modern economy. But making Nordhaus's research scalable is
Sample complete. Ready to continue?